Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, the community. It's made up of developers, distro maintainers, Linux personalities, and everyday users. And the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host, Rocco, and with me is my friend, Ryan. DasGeek.
How you doing, man?
Yeah. What's happening, brother?
Oh, so much. We just got back from Self. I had an amazing time there with you, and we were just discussing how you did the sign-off for the DL, which this is how we met. Me and you doing this right here. Those episodes used to be just me and you for a while, and It was amazing. We had such a great time, and it's awesome to be on the show. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Well, it was it was a great thing to meet you and to finally get to put a personality, even though you're a big personality, to finally put that personal touch to the relationship that we have. And just being around, eating breakfast, drinking coffee. It was just amazing.
Picking on Michael.
Picking on Michael was awesome too.
That's the best.
Nobody knows how we woke him up that morning.
No, exactly. What happened itself stays itself.
That's right. All right. So you're not unknown in the Linux world. You are everywhere, basically. But who is Ryan?
Well, I think of myself as a father first and a geek father, most importantly, as a part of that. So I have two kids, a 4 and a 6-year-old that I'm raising, and I'm a husband, and I'm raising them the right way, Rocco. And the only way to raise your kids is as a geek. You have to teach them about AMD. You have to teach them about ARM, and you have to teach them about Linux.
Yes.
And yes, my 4 and 6-year-old.
Last part.
Exactly. My 4 and 6-year-old run Linux there. So I'm a technology geek. I always have been. And that really is what encompasses me and my passions and what I geek out about. But I do tell this story that, about being a geek, that it's not just computers all the time. There's an individual I met, for instance, one time who was geeking out completely about watches. Now, I could care less about watches, but he was geeking out so much about this watch that I ended up like, man, I need to get one of those watches. He was going into the details about how every gear was handcrafted and all this stuff. So to me, being a geeking out and being a geek father is really getting excited about things. I know that's shocking to you, me getting excited about things, but really getting involved and loving what you're working on and being passionate about it. And I think that's what encompasses the personality that I want to present to the world, that I want to present as a father, and, having fun and having that childlike wonderment when it comes to learning and education. And that's what I try to bring to the community. So to me, that's what I hope DasGeek represents out there, and myself.
Yep. It's an awesome thing to watch somebody who is passionate about something. You can watch a video and somebody will be explaining something and you're just like, take it or leave it. But if somebody is explaining it and really passionate about it,
it's infectious.
Yeah, there's nothing better than that.
And it doesn't matter what they're talking about. Like I remember one instance being in line, and I could care less about sports, clearly, as pale as I am. But there was this older man, he must have been in the 70s or 80s, and he just turned around and started talking to me about baseball. I don't care about baseball. Probably don't even know half the terms they use in it. But I sat there, I was like, can I join you for your dinner? Because nobody else was sitting with him. And we sat there for like 45 minutes talking about baseball. Him talking, because clearly I don't know anything about it. But people geek out about something. It's something instantly infectious that you want to get in there and learn it. And you want to have that passion for it. And kids have it naturally. That's what I love about having kids, is you constantly have that example of, everything to them is new and exciting. But when you see it in adults, it does encourage people to go back and learn more about things and not just keep their minds made up about technology, or I like this and I only like this and that type of stuff. And that's really what I want my channel and my brand to bring.
So what is it that you do for a living?
So I work in the telecom industry, and I've worked there for 19 years now. Most of those 19 years were spent being in a leadership role, either a manager or supervisor, along those lines. Today, I have a very unique team of individuals who handle web development, they handle deep analytics for executives, and they support SQL servers. Unfortunately, nothing I do in my day job really directly relates to Linux, except we've recently adopted the Azure platform at my work. So Azure, of course, is Microsoft's tool that they've built on top of Linux. So I am getting to play a little bit with Linux from a work perspective there. But yeah, I've been in telecommunications, and my job really for most of it has been started out with coding and has moved myself into leadership. And that's kind of where I've stayed, is leading teams in various parts of the country.
Very nice.
Yep.
So what do you do outside of Linux? Like maybe outside? Or you have any hobbies?
Don't go outside. That place is dangerous. It's so funny because it's hard for me when people are like, what are your hobbies outside of Linux, to come up with something outside of Linux, because it's encapsulated so much of my life. I love anything computer based. And even though this technically relates to Linux, I love building computers. I love working on hardware. Hardware is my passion. When I first started out, I was 13 years old. My dad had a computer business. I've been around them my whole life. And I built computers back then. That was really my first job. That was the first time I held something in my hands, in this case, motherboards, video cards, power supplies, and felt like this fits naturally. I'm not scared of it. I just go in there and start plugging things in, and it just fit for me. And so my hobbies are always, in fact, that's really the point of my YouTube channel. A lot of it is literally just recording whatever thing I'm messing with this week. I think outside of work, I spend a lot of time building Raspberry Pi projects, doing things with my kids that are, of course, technology related, because we'll just have to get an uncle or something to show them the football and all that junk. I'm going to show them the tech stuff.
All right. So before we get into Linux, I mean, you were obviously subject to computers at a young age. Yeah. But what was the first time you touched a computer?
Wow, that's an interesting question. My dad built his office started out in our house, because when he started the business, much like most small businesses, we were broke. My mom was a saint. She never told him go out there and get a real job. She was letting him build this dream, right? And she was a nurse. And so he had a partner with him, and they were trying to build actual AI. This was back in late 80s, early 90s. They were trying to build AI, and they were writing different software. My dad loved software. I loved hardware, which worked out later in business. I guess the first time I touched a computer would be sneaking into his office for the few times that he wasn't in there, and just taking a look at all of the equipment that was always spread out all over the ground, and probably typing things on the keyboard and doing what my kids do today. They just come into the room and start jamming on the thing, and just to see what comes on the screen. But I remember the first computer that my dad built for me, and that was a rare instance in our house, because most people who are in the profession, they don't have the nice thing that they do for a profession, because they never think about doing it for themselves, was an IBM Blue Lightning. And that was the coolest computer on the planet. And to this day, I still have somewhere an IBM Blue Lightning processor, because it meant so much to me. That was the first computer me and my dad built for me together, and it was 75 megahertz.
Whoa, dude.
Yeah, it would blow the doors off anything. So that IBM Blue Lightning, to me, that was like the first computer that was mine, that I just sat there, and it had this gigantic, ridiculous case, and it was amazing. I fell in love with it immediately.
Right. So it's safe to say that you are not and just an everyday user. You have quite a technical background.
Yeah, I've had a unique background. Most of it's not Linux, though. So what's interesting about my stuff is I spent most of my life in DOS and Windows. But yes, from an early age on, I have been around computers my entire life. And today, I don't think that's very unique. But back when I was a kid, it was, because computers were $3,000-$4,000 a piece. People didn't have them like they do today. It wasn't something you always would see in somebody's house.
Right.
Today, you're probably going to see more computers than you're going to see TVs. Back then, it was more TVs than you would ever see a computer. So I've been around it my whole life, from the coding aspects, although I do not consider myself a good coder at all. I can code and I can get what I need done, but I am definitely more on the hardware side, as most people recognize in the various shows that I do. If I'm asked to come on shows to talk about something specifically, it's usually hardware because that's my expertise.
Right. So did you hear about Linux back then? I mean, like with your dad's shop, or was that not even a discovered word yet?
If I had heard it, there are two instances that come to mind. One was, or two different operating systems that came to mind. First, my dad, when we first started, he wrote his own operating system. When we'd sell the computers, it came with his own operating system. I don't even think it had a name. It was just basically a DOS prompt, but it had a menu system in there. So new people who were getting into computers would power it on. This is before Windows came really popular and all this. You'd power it on and you would have a little menu, and you'd pick which program you want to launch, and it would launch it. And it was very, very simple little operating system. Then Windows started picking up, and I really remember 3.11 being the big thing during that time, and everybody wanted Windows. It just, took off like wildfire. And my dad, he wasn't into writing operating systems, so he just migrated all the computers we sold to 3.11. I do recall a couple instances where if I remember correctly, I saw some Red Hat boxes come in, and I also saw an OS called OS2 Warp. And the two times that I used to repair the computers in the back, and the two times those type of computers came in, I was like, Dad, what is this? And he would take it over. It was like the only two times I actually remember not being able to repair it because I didn't know what it was. So that was pretty much my experience with Linux. And then later in telecom, I always worked on the front end servers, so more of the servers that are local to the individual call centers and those things, which all have a Windows front end. Mm-hmm. But on the back end in telecom, on the back end servers, there's a lot of Linux and Unix, but I never worked in those areas directly, so I didn't get to personally play with them. And to me, it was just this kind of terminal code to run a network that you would never put on a desktop. So I think I had heard about it here and there, but it just really was never something that I had an aha moment that I'm going to go try that, because I was Windows, and that's pretty much how I made my living, was doing Windows.
Right. So you have a spot in time where you're maybe heard about or saw a Linux operating system, and then you have a 30-day Linux challenge. So fill in the blank there of how that comes about.
So I start doing these videos and on my channel about privacy and security. And it was interesting because the more I was digging into Windows metadata grabbing, especially when Windows 10 dropped, and all the privacy and security issues, and specifically when I had gone in and changed a bunch of these settings, I think I even did a video on it, where these are the settings you can turn off, where Windows is not supposed to track everything you're doing and all of that type of stuff. And then later, when I was doing some other videos, I think these were like sequel videos or some of the first videos I did on my channel and things, I rebooted and all those settings were turned back on after an update. And I thought, that's so creepy that those settings came back on. And so I started getting comments from people on those videos saying, hey, if you're really into this privacy and security stuff, you need to check out Linux. I believe one of the first recommendations was like Tails or Wonix, one of those. And you need to do some more research into this if you really want to be private. So I started doing research into Tails and Wonix, and I started looking at Linux. And I started seeing all these articles talking about Linux being so much more secure, so much more private for individuals. And obviously Tails and Wonix was probably way on the far scale of my knowledge at that point to ever touch. But I was booting it and playing with it, and it was pretty interesting to look at and see what they were doing there. But every video I was watching was like, hey, here's my 1914 Dell P150 that I've put Linux on. Isn't this great? I'm like, I guess. But as a technologist, I'm like, well, does anybody run Linux on anything that's not 80 years old? That's just what I kept finding. And I'm one of those, when I decide I'm going to learn something, I will read, I will download podcasts related to it. I will watch videos. My way of geeking out is to envelop myself for endless hours into that thing till I understand it well enough that I feel like I can teach it. Because once you get to the point where you feel like you can start teaching it, then, and then as you're teaching it, you learn a lot more, especially when people leave comments saying what you said is moronic. So then you start learning even more and more. But yeah, so I started from there I decided, well, I've got this beast of a computer back then. I think it was like an Intel i7 6700K and NVIDIA 1070 or 1060.
Really? An NVIDIA card? I'm surprised.
Yeah, actually been NVIDIA for a long time, believe it or not, back in the day. But of course, AMD's better now.
Right, of course.
Yeah. But yeah, I had this very powerful computer at the time, and I didn't see anybody else doing videos on powerful equipment in Linux. So I threw Linux on my computer to see what I would do. And I thought, well, I'll film it, and I'm probably going to hate it and go back to Windows, but it might get people's attention. This guy going to Linux and then as the first time and then going back to Windows, because that was the plan
right
the whole time. But that obviously didn't happen. So, yeah.
Well, so you didn't have any fear of jumping in, obviously. How was your 30-day challenge received?
It was interesting because the community really rallied. When you start a YouTube channel, the first time somebody gives you a thumbs up, you feel like you've conquered the world.
Yep.
The first time 10 people subscribe to you, I'm telling my wife, like, 10 people really like me. And she's like, really? Because these people have millions of subs. I'm like, yeah, but I got 10 and you got to start somewhere. And so you really do. These things matter. And it matters if you talk about giving feedback to channels and the things that people say to each other. We are all humans, and this stuff matters. And people were so kind. Now, were there mean people? Yeah, it's the internet, of course.
Right.
But there were people like you who eventually came around, and others that are in the communities that me and you both frequent that were there at the very beginning going, hey, do this. And they were saying it in a nice way. Hey, try this. Hey, you got to learn the difference between these two things. Because while I enveloped myself in learning it, I was pronouncing things wrong because the only knowledge I had was really me reading a lot of this stuff in depth.
Well, Linux is so good in that area.
Yeah, and words are so easy, Yeah, they're always simple to pronounce. So there were just a lot of things that I didn't get right, but people weren't mad about it. And I think it's because I didn't come out there and go, hi, I'm DasGeek, the greatest Linux mind ever. I came out there saying, I don't know what I'm doing, but follow along with me. And that's what we did. And I tried to use it for 30 days and the channel just boomed. From my perspective, it just started shooting up with all of these users and passionate people and encouraging me to keep going and giving me alternatives when I'd run into issues. Because I believe some of those videos were in the 30 days, me saying these are the things I can't find a replacement for. And then you look in the comments section and people were just layering in the options. They wanted, and that's what I love about Linux, is they wanted it to be successful from the very beginning, just because it meant a new person who was passionate about the product at the end of the day.
So the first distro that you tried, give us some pros and cons to that experience from a new user's perspective.
Wow. I believe it was Ubuntu. It would have been Unity at the time, so not GNOME. Back then, NVIDIA wasn't so easy to get working, so that was a frustrating part of it, as I recall. I don't remember getting any black screen with a blinking cursor, although I certainly had that with, I believe, Fedora at the time and others that I was trying during those 30 days. But Ubuntu worked, but I remember having issues getting that driver to work. There was also this kind of panic a little bit when it came to not having Adobe around, because first of all, when I started the YouTube channel, I invested in it. I bought licenses for Adobe. Those are not cheap.
Right. And who wants to lose that?
Yeah. Who wants to lose that? So there was that moment but what was unique to me about Linux is that it was so complete of a product and it was free. To this day, it blows my mind. that somebody just lets me download this whole operating system and doesn't charge me anything for it, right? And I think people should donate, but that's a different discussion. But ultimately, I was able to get this complete operating system for free. And I couldn't believe there was so much software out there. And I guess I'd just been in the corporate world so long that everything to me was, well, if you want this, you got to buy it. And you got to get the license. And then when you redo your computer, you need to go type in 55 licenses, and hopefully you kept them so that you can reuse that software. And this was nowhere in Linux, right? I just was downloading these programs, and they didn't even have malware in them. They were free, and there was no malware. What is this thing? It's chaotic. It's madness, but it was beautiful, and things were working. So that was the first thing probably that shocked me the most, was that I wasn't constantly pulling out my credit card to get new licenses set up for the operating system.
Right. So was there a point where you went back to Windows, or did you stay from the 30-day challenge all the way through in Linux?
There were times during, especially at the beginning, where I would dual boot to game, or I would randomly go back into Windows to, I think during the 30-day challenge, there may have been one of the first or a couple first videos I might have gone into Windows to edit those videos before I found Kdenlive. So I was dual booting back then, basically, between the different OSs. But for the most part, I stayed in Linux the entire time. And the only instances I would go in there I really kept Windows on there because I was scared that what if this Linux thing breaks? I don't want to lose all of my information. I don't want to, because you're constantly distro hopping too, especially after the 30 days. So there was a lot of fear there of ever getting rid of Windows, because that was my bread and butter forever. And I knew Windows inside and out. There was nothing that could break in Windows that I couldn't fix, in my opinion. So why am I sitting here in this brand new thing where I'm a complete noob? And it was because there was so much education opportunity. But I think I stayed in Linux pretty much the whole time for the most part. There was some, booting here and there, but I was pretty devout to staying in it and sticking with it.
Were there a lot of bumps in the road as far as transitioning things over from using Windows to using Linux?
Do you mean hardware wise or software?
Software, either way.
There was frustration. I remember the only thing that there were a couple of things I got stuck with, though. I found things like Kdenlive. I was frustrated with finding a good video editor and things like that. But the community, I needed a good note taker, if I recall, was one, and Simple Note was some, and Cherry Note were two that the community recommended. So there were minor frustrations from a software standpoint of just not knowing where to find the software. But the hardware was a frustrating piece, and specifically it was the microphones and the audio equipment setup. There were issues where I had a Behringer, I think at one point, which is an industry standard piece of equipment, UH44, 45, I can't remember the exact model, but it wouldn't find a signal at all. I was doing a video, if I recall, a lot of this is hard for me to remember now because it's like 4 years ago, but I was doing a video, if I recall, comparing it against the Scarlett 2i2, and I plugged the Scarlett in and it worked immediately. But I was frustrated I couldn't use my Behringer because that was my new piece of audio equipment that I wanted to, but it wasn't going to work. So I stuck with the Scarlett. So there were little agitations, I would say, but nothing too frustrating. Now, trying other distros, back then especially, it was a different story, like trying Fedora and things like that, especially as an NVIDIA user, was a terrible experience. And I didn't understand that till much later of why that was.
Right.
But, those type of things were frustrating when, you would try to boot into, say, Fedora and you were getting a black screen with a blinking cursor and the new user has no idea what to do with that.
No. There's a lot of people that will say, oh, we'll just do this. But I think at some point when we get into Linux so far, we forget what it's like to be a new user.
Yes.
And I guarantee you 99.9 or probably 100% of new users are just going to turn off the computer if
Absolutely.
they get a command prompt. They're just not going to know what to do. Most of them are not going to go research, hey, this is what happened. They just know it didn't work.
Yep.
So
they're going to look at, when you say, oh, just go in there and put no mode set into your grub. They're going to be like, what's grub? And what's this magical scroll text sitting on my screen that I'm supposed to interpret or where to put no mode set at? Like it's ridiculous stuff. So I'm thankful for distros out there that do cater to that new user experience, because without them, we would have a lot less users, including probably myself.
Yep. Linux has come such a long way from the time frame of trying it in the beginning to now that, I had said in another show that we are at a good point right now. We have strides to make, but we are at a point where software is available, where distros are easy to install. Drivers are easy to install. Games are available for Linux more than ever. I think we're at a good place right now.
There's never been a better time to be in Linux. I mean, look at the kernels recently. Do you see how much hardware enablement is getting put into the kernel from all of these manufacturers? We're talking Wacom, Logitech, AMD, Intel. Like, they're all throwing their hardware drivers into the kernel now. I don't think that was happening as often before. Like, they were like, no, go reverse engineer it yourself. We're not helping you. And there's so much support coming from the big vendors and big attention getting to Linux. And so that to me is super exciting. There's never been a better time to be in Linux.
Yep. Agreed. So your 30-day challenge, you tried a couple distros. Do you consider yourself a distro hopper?
I certainly was. I think I was one of the kings up there with you, Rocco, and distro.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I've settled down a lot lately, though. But yes, I distro hopped like there was nothing else to do on the planet. My wife must have looked at me like, "What is your problem? You get your computer perfect, and then you sit over there for 2 hours reinstalling all these new distros just to try it out because it has a different way of different looking desktop, or different application manager or whatever." And yeah, it's so addictive because you don't have any choices in Windows. Like, right. I bet you most people can't even name the desktop environment in Windows because nobody even thinks about it. You're just like, whatever they give me, I guess I have to use. But yeah, when there's so much choice for the first time, I think it's actually a really good thing for new people to do, although me and you probably took it overboard a bit. But I think it's a
little overboard.
I think it's a good thing for people to do. Remember when we did I did the extreme distro hopping?
Yes, I remember, dude. I've lost some hair and had some grays added because of it.
Rocco would be like, "We're about to do the show," and I'd be like, 20 minutes because I'm
reinstalling. Like, what are you doing, dude?
I want to try something new.
We are about to do a show, for crying out loud, and you're reinstalling your operating system. Like,
but that's how awesome Linux is, that you could literally 30 minutes before a show reload the whole system, and because you're not hunting down registration keys, you could be up and running still on time. And that's the amazing
proof
thing.
positive.
Yeah, there you go.
So I was going to ask you how many distros and desktop environments you tried, but everybody knows you've pretty much tried them all. Yeah. So did you finally find the one for you?
Yeah.
Maybe, no.
No, I have found ones that are starting to more align with, as you start to get into Linux more and learn more about it and spend so much time with developers, you really start to find the things that are important to you about Linux.
Right.
And some of those things, as somebody who's heavily into technology and heavily into cutting edge technology, I think that a rolling distro is the future for desktop environments. And I look for rolling desktops. And the reason I say that is, obviously AMD is one of the major hardware manufacturers throwing their drivers for their hardware into the Linux kernel. And then you have Wacom and Logitech and others that I've mentioned throwing their drivers into the Linux kernel. One of the problems with Linux, though, a lot of distributions is they update on 6-month, 2-year cycles.
Right.
So you don't ever get to take the advantage of that Wacom tablet that now would suddenly come alive when you plugged it in, or that new AMD card that you got and plugged in. You would have no ability. And Intel's going to be going into the GPU market. They're likely, and most of their products are released in the kernel as well. So the only one out there that's really not is NVIDIA, and theirs is proprietary anyway. So I think that a rolling distro for a desktop environment, as the new groups of people are coming into Linux, because Linux can game now. So you're going to have people coming in with higher end equipment. They're expecting to come in there and do high end things. Even the game engines where you're designing games, they're going to be bringing high end equipment, and they're not going to be okay with waiting 6 to 12 months to be able to get their hardware working. So to me, I think one of the things that's important is having a solid rolling distro. And I have found Arch to be an incredible, stable distro. I've had a lot of issues with Arch-based distros in the past. They all work amazing and they're beautiful for 3 to 4 months and then they crash. But I've not had that experience at all in Arch. Also, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is another example, though I've not been on it as long as Arch, so I can't say it's as stable yet. I think I've been on it since Richard Brown's been on Destination Linux. It was that a couple weeks ago now, right? Maybe. So I've been on a couple weeks, and I update it every single day to try to break it, because I really want to know, is it as solid as the others? And so I'm hoping that we kind of get over the old mindset of a rolling distro means it has to be chaos and bleeding edge, and you're going to destroy your computer. And we can find distros out there that, because the problem with Arch is it's too hard to install. So most people, even when you recommend it, are like, yeah, okay, whatever, dude. So I'm hoping to find some rolling distros that are more easy, like a Solus, Tumbleweed, and things out there to push. But I would say Arch is probably my home.
I think that was the long way around to say, by the way.
By the way, I use Arch. There we go. All right. Cut out all the other stuff and just put, by the way, I use Arch right there.
So, desktop environment?
I'd like to always say XFCE, but I've been spending a lot of time in KDE lately. Yep. It's got to be Michael's bad influence. And,
it is. But Noah's no help either. So
you were no help either. No, I really like KDE. I like shooting videos in KDE when I'm doing a YouTube video, because XFCE is amazing, and I can't wait till the latest version comes out. I'm such a fan, and always will have a special love for XFCE because it was the first one I fell in love with. But and I hope that they can bring and more people get involved in XFCE to bring it more current looking.
Right.
But to me, when you're showing off and a desktop environment and you're trying to tell people Linux is better, you need something that looks better than Windows, and KDE simply does. GNOME does too, frankly. But and the workflow is fine in GNOME. In fact, you gave me the challenge of staying in GNOME, and I ended up digging it. I found my ways around it. But having to go in there and find so many extensions that you have to end up installing to get the thing to work, and then it being single threaded on top of that, it's just not for me. And that's why probably KDE is my favorite right now.
Well, if you look at Windows 10, you can see how much they basically stole from Plasma. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are so many features and visual looks that are similar to Plasma, and yet Plasma was before Windows 10. So it's
absolutely. Yep.
All right. So I know the answer to this question, but do you still use Windows, Mac in any way?
I am a purist at this point. I'm that annoying person you don't want to invite to dinner because I'm going to tell you how evil Windows Empire. No, I wouldn't do that. But I don't run Windows. I don't have a Windows hard drive in any of my machines. I have Windows nowhere but work. I have to use Windows for work. But outside of that, not a single machine that I use has Windows on it at all.
Now, do you find any problems or issues with if you do work at home or coordinating between your Linux computer and your work computer?
No, I mean, I have it. My work computer is a laptop with Windows on it that the work provides. So I don't have a choice of what goes on that because it's locked down and all that. So when I'm at home, I'm using that and they don't interact with any of my Linux PCs. Now, there are times where I do have to send files.
Right.
From, maybe it's a, W-2 form or something I'm filling out that I have to send files from my work computer to a personal computer. And obviously work is using Microsoft Office and things like that. But LibreOffice is so amazing. It's just gotten better and better. I remember times where you would open Word documents in LibreOffice and you basically got some form of hieroglyphics. I'm not sure what it was, but hey, today it pretty much just looks like it should. There may be a couple differences and indentions that are off, but 5 seconds later you have a document in ODT format that works just as good.
Right. There are other people who consider using LibreOffice, or it's not up to their standards for Microsoft Office. Do you find that at all, that it's not compatible? Or
I don't disagree that there are things that Microsoft Office has that I think are difficult, not impossible, because there's always that person like, I found a way. If you put in this 9,000 you can do the same thing in LibreOffice. I think it's more about spreadsheets, though. To me, Excel, a lot of people hate Excel because it's so complex and it's so bloated, and all of that's true, but it's also so powerful. I mean, it is a fantastic tool, and Sheets is a fantastic tool as well. But, Microsoft's products all talk to each other. They're all integrated on the back end. Yep. If you have servers there, you can, share those documents easily on 365 and collaborate right from there. They've got the cloud infrastructure built in on top of it. Whereas, on Linux, you're going to have to take that LibreOffice document and, well, if you're a traitor to privacy, go to Google. If you're not a traitor to privacy, then you'll go to some other, service like maybe you'll do your own Nextcloud. So you got to drop your own server. And it's just so much, it's so much more overly complex than it needs to be, which is why I'm really hoping there is a solid solution. We heard about Mozilla maybe coming out with one. Librem out there is trying to come out with one. I don't care who ends up being the best one. It needs to be private. It needs to be secure, and hopefully has a reasonable cost. And I'm very excited about the idea of getting there, because I think the cloud for documents and things is where the world is going to. I don't think there's going, LibreOffice does what it needs to do for a desktop-based system, and it does it very well.
Right.
But I think most people now are doing a lot more collaboration and things like that with their documents, and we need a good cloud solution that you don't have to be a server admin to implement.
Right. So what is your daily workflow like? Is there software that you use every day that you need? Tell us.
Yeah, I have become addicted to Cody MD. That's where I help. I write the show for DL still, and like I did when you were on there, and I do other people's shows that I help with as well, that I will help write their stories for. And so Cody MD has become one of my favorite applications out there, period. So it is a fantastic markdown editor out there. So when we were talking about solutions that are simple, people are like, well, you just said Cody MD, so why wouldn't you use that to replace the Office thing? Because most people don't type in Markdown, and it doesn't have the great spell checking and all that type of stuff. But that is a go-to tool for me. OBS, obviously, I have to have my OBS for recording videos. Steam is a must for me. Zoom, because we do most of our recording and things in Zoom. I use GIMP a lot. Anytime I'm making a wallpaper, or not a wallpaper, but a new screenshot for a new video I've done or anything else, I'm generally creating that within GIMP. And Thunderbird for emails. And I do use a proprietary software now for video editing. But the community forced me to do this, Rocco.
Of course, yes, it's the community's
fault. So I use Lightworks, but it's the community's fault because there were so many YouTubers going out there saying video editing on Linux is terrible, and you can't do professional video editing on Linux. So I went out there to find one. DaVinci's a piece of garbage, in my opinion, because it barely works on anybody's computer, and it made
Is that because it doesn't work on AMD?
No, it will work on AMD. It's just it doesn't work in any distro. Like, good luck getting the thing to ever boot up. Like, it's insanity. And these were the videos that people were doing out there saying video editing on Linux is terrible, were all people trying to install DaVinci and failing miserably. And so, of course, naturally, even in this video, people will come and be like, I use DaVinci and it always worked. And I'm glad for them. But most people, including myself, who I've now installed Gentoo, I obviously have installed Arch, I've written my own scripts, but I cannot get to this day DaVinci to work in any distro. I've not in Ubuntu, not in anything. So if you can, wow, you're amazing. But Lightworks works in every distro I've ever tested. And so that to me, and it is a video editor that has been able to edit Emmy award-winning movies. So if you say you can't edit videos in Linux, it's absolutely possible. Obviously, Kdenlive is the open source, free, awesome version. But I did get Lightworks and purchase a license just to prove that professional video editing could be done in Linux, and there's a good solution for it. And to me, that's Lightworks.
Was there a big learning curve going from Kdenlive to Lightworks?
I would say so. There's a lot of different, it's not a huge learning curve, but I did video series on it. Actually, I think it was for somebody's mom. They said, hey, my mom wants to learn Lightworks. Can you do a tutorial video on the series? So I did. So I have it out there on my channel. I think the unique thing is there's a lot more professional screen setups and multicam options that you're not used to seeing in Kdenlive. And when you do get used to them, you realize how powerful it is when you're able to do multicam editing and things like that and multiple scenes, and the rendering, because it actually uses hardware acceleration, is super fast. And that's probably the biggest advantage right now it has over Kdenlive.
Yep. Is there any software that you'd like to see come to Linux that's not available right now?
I really think Office needs to be with Linux. Look, we've given Windows WSL2 now. We basically said, hey, you can have Ubuntu and we'll patch it and we'll give you the full Linux experience right from within Windows just because you asked. Couldn't we at least negotiated Office or something in here? We got Paperclip instead. I mean, we got Clippy, the Paperclip. That was our negotiation tactics on the Linux side, or DX12, so every game would play. I think
that would be awesome.
Did that in there, but yeah, I would like to see those things come to Linux, and I think Microsoft owes us that for the fact that we had all of our main developers go out there and bend over backwards to make sure our stuff works in Windows for whatever reason we did that for. So yeah, that's what I would like to see.
Well, everybody knows you're big into gaming. Yeah. So obviously you do a lot of gaming on Linux. Give us something about the latest game you tried.
Wow, I haven't gamed as much as I really want to, so that's a tough one. You know, I've been playing Deus Ex. So I've been playing some of the Deus Ex games out there, and Batman Arkham Asylum was one that I've recently started playing again because my son is a huge Batman fan. So he just thinks it is the bomb to see Batman in there just whooping on some clowns of the Jokers, you know, like he thinks it's so exciting. So yeah, I've been playing those when I can, but there's so much going on, especially with the fest, as you know, it kind of completely messes up your schedule stuff that I haven't gamed as much as I really have wanted to lately. But those are the two games that I'm playing the most.
So what drives your passion about Linux the most? Is it the flexibility of Linux, the openness of it, the community?
At first, it was the privacy, and that still is a major contributor, you know, at the very top. But I later came to learn about something actually through the company I work for, because it's a big driving motivation of their charities and things. It's called about the digital divide. And this is a situation right here in the US. There are people who have no access to do kids who have no access to do their homework on a computer. The libraries that exist are so far away that some of the bus routes don't even take them near it. Their parents both work. They have no ability to do their homework. And what kind of disadvantage would this give you in today's day and age if you have a computer and you can look everything up on the internet, and the other kid has no computer, no access to the internet? So his mom hands him, you know, the 1980s encyclopedias to go look up stuff and manually type out his doc. I mean, it's just a terrible disadvantage to not have access to that software. And when I think about Linux, one of the great things to me that Linux brings is closing that digital divide. You don't have to have thousands of dollars to download Linux. You don't have to have hundreds of dollars to buy the license, number one, for the operating system. And you don't have to have thousands of dollars worth of software and registration codes and everything else. If you want to go be a video editor, you can go download Kdenlive and start learning to video edit. If you want to make YouTube content, all the software for OBS and everything is there for you free. If you want to be an artist, you have Krita, you have GIMP, you have all of the software that you're not going to be paying hundreds of dollars for Adobe on. So now if you're a game developer, a kid wants to be a game developer, they can download this stuff and start using it without ever having it to cost them a penny from the software standpoint. So it doesn't fix the digital divide entirely because you still have to pay for internet and other things, but it certainly closes a major facet of that gap. And one of the most expensive parts of it, which is a computer, getting a computer, right, and then the software that goes on top of it, basically making it impossible for certain families to ever be able to afford it. And Linux does that. And it not only does it here, but it does it all around the world in areas that are impoverished and don't have the option of spending that money on licenses. And
that's funny because it's so great to see kids learning and doing things on Linux. You know, like we have in the Biddle group a young man named Pizza, and he is amazing to talk to, dude. Yeah. I mean, he is so young, and yet he has such a passion for Linux, and it's awesome to see young kids get into it like that.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how unfearful, they are with Linux. My son and my daughter, they started out on Raspbian, and now they use Pop! OS, and there's no fear. They'll go right up there and just start clicking around, finding the menu, launching games. There's absolutely zero fear for them. And I remember when I trained computers, because when my dad was doing his company, I started my own company I call Computer Tutor. And I used to train people computers. And most of the people back then didn't know anything. Even the kids didn't know things about computers, which is very different today. But the first thing I would tell people is there's nothing you can do here I can't fix, software-wise. Right. Don't throw it off a cliff. There's nothing here you can't do software-wise. But that was the hardest thing to get people to think about, because to them, every time they're clicking it, they think they're clicking the nuclear launch codes to blow the thing up. So, but kids are fearless, and that makes it such a perfect audience for something like Linux, because they're not going to have the same fear adults have, or the same preconceived ideas of what an operating system should or shouldn't be.
I think that's the biggest thing, because they're so open to trying whatever that desktop environment or distro gives you. They're open to just using it rather than saying, I want it this way, I want it that way. And that's a great thing about Linux, the flexibility to change whatever you want. But I think it's awesome to have that childlike mind to say, I'm going to try this and do it this way to see how well it works.
Absolutely. Yep. There's nothing better than that.
Yep. So you have a GitHub page. And you have put a lot of stuff up there.
Right.
What is the most exciting problem that you've ever had on Linux and then you solved?
Man, so this one's really, really good because this project does not get near enough attention.
Of course.
So I have one project out there where I wrote a script that basically does installation for people, and it creates a nice little GUI. You pick the software. You've used it. Zeb's used it. Michael's.
I still use it.
And so it's a really cool script out there. But the one I'm most proud of that nobody looks at is the PulseAudio Fix. So you remember when I told you earlier about the Scarlett?
Yep.
There was one issue that constantly happens with the Scarlett in Linux, and I'm not the only one. It happens with anybody who tries to use this type of audio equipment. In fact, if I had the Behringer today, I bet you I could get it working because of this. And I have gone in and I finally, after spending weeks trying to figure out what it is that's causing this problem, where every once in a while you would have basically, let's say I had OBS up and then I opened Zoom. Both of them are grabbing an audio channel.
Yep.
And what would happen is you'd get this static that comes across every time you're talking. And it's basically because the way Pulse is it sets a standard hertz and channels up for the most generic of audio equipment. You know, what you go to Walmart and buy your USB headphone speakers and just the most generic codec there possible. But this high-end equipment, this I wouldn't say pro, but the high-end consumer equipment out there, it's running at a much higher hertz, sometimes 96,000 hertz plus and things like that it has a requirement of. It also has many more channels and things like that available to it. And timing, latency is important with this specialty equipment. So I figured out, along with Arch's help, because some of this came from studying the Arch Wiki, how PulseAudio interfaces with these devices. And I have created settings out there that makes that issue completely disappear. It doesn't matter what distro you're on. It basically allows you to type in some commands. It pulls down the specs that your audio equipment should be at. You then edit the PulseAudio config file with those settings, which before this, I didn't even know that was a thing that you could do because nobody talks about it. And you will have no issues anymore. So it's the one I'm the most proud of fixing because it's plagued me the longest in Linux. And it's also the one nobody cares about.
You heard it here first, folks. Ryan DasGeek has fixed PulseAudio. Just saying.
It wasn't Simon, the smarter one. It was me. Yeah.
Is there a best source in your mind for information about Linux? I mean, everybody learns differently. Some people learn by watching videos. Some people learn by reading manuals. That's not you.
Clearly. As Martin emphasized in Mate's release notes.
What do you think the best place for Linux information is to go?
Wow. There's no one source. I really feel like people need to use Linux in a VM if you're a hands-on person, right? Don't necessarily start off. I mean, you can, depending if how brave you are, but I wouldn't start off even dual booting your machine, although you want to get there eventually. I would start off with VMs and understand that you're going to not understand how things are going to work right away. And you're going to have to be patient and understand you're learning something it's familiar, but completely new. And you're going to learn more things about an operating system. I told you I made my living off Windows. When I came into Linux, I learned more about how an operating system works. Even though I supported Windows machines my whole life, I learned more about operating systems in Linux than I ever did supporting Windows. So you're going to learn so much. If you love to learn, Linux is perfect for you. I think surrounding yourself with people like in the community, join the Telegram groups, your Telegram group, for instance, the Telegram groups I'm involved in, all of them we share a lot of our community, right? I mean, a lot of the great people are in and out of all of our community, both your Destination Linux community and all of that stuff. They jump back and forth between them. And there's so many good people there that will help you out when you get stuck. So in YouTube videos that are out there, I mean, you and I both have them that you can go out there and watch somebody else go through this stuff, listen to shows like this, podcasts, how other people learn, but there's no one source for Linux out there. In fact, when I talked about enveloping yourself in learning, Linux is amazing for that because you've got podcasts, you have YouTube videos, you have the Arch Wiki, which I do not recommend for new people because this is way up here. But you have all of these options out there that you can, utilize which one's best for you. But I like to tell people start in a VM, play around with it, and then, within a week or so, try to get yourself into that dual boot setup. Going hopefully on a computer if you can, that you're not afraid of losing information, but at least back all your stuff up and then just envelop yourself in it. Go in head first and don't try to boot back into Windows. That's the one thing that I try not to encourage. Once you make that commitment, stick with it, because I think a lot of people's natural inclination is to go back to what's familiar to them.
Yep.
And if you stick with it, you're going to learn so much that would even help you if you do go back to Windows, understand how an operating system works. But likely, like me, you won't have a chance because you will be assimilated into Linux.
Well, you mentioned Telegram, and it's something that I never put together with learning or finding problems finding solutions to problems.
Right.
But I have found that it has been a huge resource in fixing problems because it's real-time connection, real-time interaction, and depending on which group you're in, there are hundreds of users there ready to answer your questions or point you to the Arch Wiki or something.
RTSM. No, they don't do that. I mean,
there hasn't been a problem that I couldn't go to the Biddle group or the Destination Linux group and say, hey guys, I'm having this issue. Do you guys know anything about it? And somebody hasn't answered with a solution to it.
Yep.
And I think it's an underrated platform as far as that's concerned. Some people don't like it because you have to give a telephone number. But I think if you're looking for help, I think it's a big plus.
Yeah, even experienced users on there, you'll see them coming in for help because it's funny. Not just because somebody, even developers out there, you'll see asking questions. You're like, oh my gosh, I know the answer to that. Because we assume if they're a developer, they must know the answer to all the world's problems. But the reality is we all run into issues. that we can't overcome or that we need somebody's help with. And I think, we have done a good job of surrounding our communities with the good people, with the right people, the ones who really do want to help new users out and aren't going to send you away to go read an article. They're going to sit there and try to help you fix it. I was also blown away recently by OpenSUSE Tumbleweeds forum. Somebody sat there with me for and was replying within 15 seconds on a Saturday all day long. I'm telling you, from you could go and find it on the forum because it was an AMD trying to get FreeSync monitor to work. And it was a monitor issue, it ended up being, but this person was sitting there troubleshooting with me all day. I didn't know them from Adam. Mm-hmm. They had no reason. They didn't even have a FreeSync monitor. They just wanted to see if they could help get it working all day long just because they're nice. Where else in the world do you find people like this? Nowhere.
That's what's awesome about Linux is the community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing.
Give me one thing that we can do to make the experience better for people as a community.
I think one of the things that we need to teach new users is to say thank you to the developers of the products that they use and about the free portion of open source. That the free portion does help with the things like digital divide. And if you are in a situation where you can't afford to, then of course, by all means, that's what it's out there for, so that you can go out there and use it. But for everyone else that can give something, we should, number one, be teaching new users, hey, when they say, I got it working finally, everything's great, this is awesome, great. Make sure you go tell the developer of that distro or software that you're using, how much you love it too. Mm-hmm. Make sure you go out there if you can, and let's say you start a YouTube channel on Linux, that some of the money maybe that you're making, that you give back. You don't have to tell anybody you're doing it, but just give back something that you can, especially if you're making money off the products. But I think that should be part of the training that we're missing in some cases, is to, yes, it's free, but that's not really what free and open source means, but most of it is free. But make sure you're going there and telling people thanks. I'm seeing so many, and I know you're seeing it too, where projects are dying off.
Yep.
Developers are going away. And I think a lot of it has to do with burnout, and we've had so many recently developers where we ask this question to, and they say, it gets depressing because the only emails we get are the negative. And so I think we have to start with ourselves, number one, those of us who've been in Linux, and say, have I stopped to say thanks lately, or give some money? And then number two, every new person that's coming into Linux, when they get excited about it, that moment when they get it and they're like, Linux is amazing, tell them to go say thanks to the developers, because they're the ones who deserve all the credit.
You're so right, though, because that job in itself is such a hard place to be, because you're spending all of your free time on this project, and most of the time, all you're hearing are about the bugs and the criticisms and the feature requests and everything else. You have to be a special person to have that ability to overlook that stuff and continue as a developer. It's awesome.
Absolutely. They're amazing. Yep.
So if there was one thing, everybody knows I love Linux, you love Linux.
Yeah.
Is there something you dislike about Linux?
Let me make it more about what I'm afraid of for Linux. As somebody who's been in corporate America for most of my life, I started in corporate America when I was 17, about to turn 18. So corporate America is not some evil thing, and empire and all that, but there's no mystery that they're there to make money, right?
Right.
And we have, for the first time, so much attention coming to Linux. And this is exciting. We have big names, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, all these companies coming in interested in Linux because they love Linux. Or is it because it's actually really profitable for them because it's free and people are leaving their products to come to it, so we better do something? I don't want people to be jaded. There's nothing wrong with these companies coming into Linux, but I do hope that those that represent Linux the most, the Canonicals, the Red Hats, those companies, will hold firm in the principles that Linux was created on. And I'm fearful that the money, the fame, the corporate pressure out there will make Linux change. And I don't want it to. I think we should be supporting the companies that support free and open source first and foremost. I think we should be supporting, it's one thing for Windows and other services to come in and incorporate Linux. There's nothing we can do about that. It's open source, but should we bend over backwards to make it run perfectly there? Probably not, and things like that. So I'm just fearful. I'm not jaded. I think some of it's amazing, and maybe it will expose a couple new people to Windows and through WSL or through the cloud services that Amazon and things have. It'll expose more people to it. But I'm also fearful of the corporate culture getting involved, and then you start having a few big companies that basically take over Linux, and what we're left with is the scraps because everybody ran off for the big fame and fortune and all of that. And obviously Linus himself has had the opportunity, if he wanted to probably be a billionaire off of the product, but he never did. And he stood firm, I think, to the importance of Linux. And I hope Linux can overcome all of this sudden fame and popularity that it's gaining. And that's my biggest fear for Linux.
Are you in the camp of Microsoft is just loving on Linux, or are you in the camp of you're kind of hesitant on trusting Microsoft?
I mean, I think Microsoft did exactly what Microsoft or any company should have done in that situation. They had no product to compete with it. They made the smart move. Let's take all of the Linux stuff and stick it in Windows. I guess where I'm frustrated at a little bit is just how easy we made the whole thing. Like, I remember seeing an article. It's like they'll have the latest Ubuntu and it will get all of the patches as soon as they come out immediately on the Windows version. I'm like, well, gee, I can go to Windows and I'm going to get all the hardware support right out of the box. I'm going to be able to run any video game that I want. And now you're telling me I get all the Linux tools there too? So if you're not a privacy and security focused individual, there's not a whole lot of reason left for you to go and port your computer over to Linux, is there, from a developer standpoint? Now, especially with the PowerShell and all of the stuff they've incorporated in the terminal. And we've helped them like tremendously make sure that this happens and runs smoothly. Should we have just not helped them? I don't know. I'm not part of those conversations in the background. All I'll say is it's weird that we're so eager, it seems like, to make it work, and everybody was celebrating so excitedly, like, "Yay, Windows noticed me!" Like, who cares? Let them go figure it out. I mean, they do contribute to open source. They do some good things out there, but ultimately, they also kind of, with gaming and things, they know that's a big deal, and they've kind of always kept their hand on top of our heads and made us fight for every little scrap to make things work in Linux. And the second they show interest in us, we're like, what can we do to help you? And that to me is weird. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think Microsoft did the logical move. I just don't know that we're doing the same thing back. I don't know. That's where I'm at with it.
Right. So thinking back, thinking back to all the reasons that you chose to run Linux, do they still apply today?
Absolutely. Privacy and security has become more important to me today than ever. And I think, thankfully, some people, a small portion of people, are starting to become a bigger portion of people that are starting to care about privacy and security. Because before, it seems like every video I did on it's like, oh, I don't care. I've never done anything wrong and all this type of stuff. But you're starting to see a lot less of that as these stories come out, as the security breaches become more severe, as the information starts being used against people for medical, starts being used against people for their credit, starts being used against. So in criminal cases, all of these things are now, people are like, wow, this actually stuff really is starting to matter. And that to me is fantastic. And I think that is a big part. And the digital divide to me is a huge, a very important cause that we have to fix, because kids should never have a disadvantage of education. When we talked about the beginning, I told you I want to be passionate, so people are passionate about learning. Like my kids are always passionate about learning. They don't think it's learning, and we don't want to tell them that because they would stop doing it then. But when you hand them something new, they will sit there and they will figure it out. They will tear it apart, and they just do it naturally, that natural curiosity. And that's what I want to spread. And Linux brings that. Like, I've been in it for, I guess I'm going on my 4th year now. and I'm still a complete rookie. Like, and I hate that feeling, Rocco. I hate it, but I'm still a rookie. I still learn new things every day. I still make stupid mistakes. And that's what's amazing to me about Linux is once you start the journey, you've got so much to learn. Good luck getting to the end. I don't even know if it's in sight for me yet because there's just so much to Linux, and that's what's beautiful about it. So yeah, absolutely. The same things that I fell in love with originally are still there. It's only much easier to install Linux now than it ever was back then. You know? Right. Yeah.
So will there ever be the year of the Linux desktop?
So many people get mad about the Linux desktop thing if I ever mention it. I think we're there. I really think we're there. The problem that Linux has now is marketing. Marketing is the biggest problem, I think. When we look at Microsoft and the PowerShell, for example, what a perfect example of taking something we've had forever and making it beautiful. We have to tell more people about it. Let me give you an example. In the YouTube videos that we do, what's the highest Linux YouTuber video out there? What do they have? 50, 60,000 subscribers?
Yep.
We're very privacy focused individuals. So what's the highest tech channel you think out there? Linus tech video, whatever. What has he got? 1.2 million. How are we ever going to get the word about Linux out when we don't even support the people who are trying to get the word about Linux out? And people are sitting there who make amazing content with 5,000 or 6,000 subscribers or 1,000 subscribers or some great content I've seen. They've been around for a while. They have 800 subscribers. We don't support our own that are trying to get the word out. I think that's an issue. We don't market well. So I think we've got to do that to propel it to the next level. But I think we're in the year of the desktop. This is what it feels like to be in the year of something where hardware manufacturers are taking you serious. Big companies are taking you serious. Every supercomputer in the world is using Linux. Governments and associations and everybody else are looking to Linux. The entire cloud is owned by Linux. I mean, to me, this is the year of Linux. We're here. It's just a matter of getting the word out to everyone else. And to do that, we really got to do a better job of propping each other up.
I agree. All I can say about that is that people act like it's a magical thing, like the year of the Linux desktop, but it's not a magical thing. It's, it's funny, the ending for Destination Linux, the journey itself. It is about how you're using it today and what you're doing with it. It's not about at some point we're going to get there, because you're never going to get there. There's always going to be something you're going to look forward to. So it's about what you're doing with it now. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. And, the way I always tell people is if there was something better out there, I would use it because I'm a technologist first. And if Windows came out today and had privacy and security and compatibility and, they fought for the freedom of the internet and these causes, I would use it because that would make it the best out there because it would have all the hardware compatibility and gaming and everything you could do. Right now, I think truly Linux is the best. If something came along and beat it, I'd use it. I'm not going to stick with something just because, it's there. I'd probably touch base with the community and be like, haha, look at me. I can run all this new hardware and tease you guys. But I would go to whatever the best is. Right now, plain and simple, Linux is the best. There's nothing else out there, in my opinion, that competes with it. Does it have its issues? Yes, but it is the best thing out there.
All right. Is there anything else you want to share with people?
I just want to thank you because I've told this story before on DL when me and you were doing it, but you are a pillar of the Linux community and you are one of the kind ones, the ones that show people how to do it right, to go out there and reach out to new people who are trying to do material, to not be mean, to not be aggressive, to not go out there and say negative things or to beat up on developers. You do the things the right way. You found my channel early on. You helped create who I am today. So I owe you a big thanks. In many ways, I owe you that, not only for my personal channel, but for the adventures that I had on DL. So thank you for doing this so we can get to know the humans behind Linux. And thank you for everything you've done for the Linux community because you're an amazing person in my book and always will be.
Thanks, man. How can people get in touch with you? You got DasGeek community, you got YouTube, but how can people get in hold of you to talk with you?
I think DasGeek community is a great place. That's where my brain dump is what I call it. So, my tagline, fill your brains. There's a section on my site called the Brain Dump where you have GitHub, you have frequently asked questions, favorite software. There you go. There's a squishy brain. So you can get a hold of me there. Of course, Destination Linux on the podcast. So if you want to go to destinationlinux.org, you can check that out. But all of my contact information is on my website. That's where you should head first. And if you like any of the content, let me know.
Awesome. All right. That wraps it up, brother. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure, man.
And thank you all for joining this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux.
Thanks, everyone.
Just getting my first line right here.
Sure.
So yeah. Don't have to look at the screen if I.
It's only 5 words though, dude.
Right. It's hard, dude. 5 is hard. Gotta have you on the screen, dude.
It's like the old times are back.
You're killing me. I didn't do this for any other one, for crying out loud. We were just able to start.
Yeah.
All right. Community question.
Mm-hmm.
Toilet paper, over or under?
Oh, what a great question for me. Let me get my sandbox out and tell you about some toilet paper stories here. First of all, the original patent show's over, so we need to go by the genius who invented it. But second, this is like 1800 and the 1800s when this thing was invented, right? So don't you think as a culture in the United States, we need to be done with toilet paper and be using a bidet? I mean, this is the future here, people. And
sure?
The bidet could run Linux, so we would know it would be reliable. Yes.
So there would be all the privacy in the world, right?
Exactly.
And that's where you want it most.
Where you want it most, right? Exactly. I love it. Great question.